Okay. So we'll get started. I'm really happy you all are here today. So Hamitaki Chante Washina Bechuzabi, Nainoslata Itahahi, Nalaquia Chaje, we chak Bishakoi Machiapi, now Shituapi, Danielle Cindy Machiapi. Happy Indigenous Peoples Day. It's an exciting day, yeah. And so we have a really great collaboration between NALSA and Lavos. And I'll just give it to Selena to kind of kick it off.
Hi, everybody. My name is Selena. I am the Vice President of NALSA here at UNLV. We're going to start off with a little bit about the tribal nations in the United States. There are 574 federally recognized tribes, also known as bands and tribes. Sovereignty is the inherent right of nations to self-govern, and different ways of self-governance include establishing a tribe's own leadership, government structure, and law enforcement, and tribal courts. There are elected tribal officials such as tribal council members, which is a government structure of usually a small committee that I guess that's a legislation kind of just really helps run the tribe. Also, the chairman and judges, depending on the tribe, can be appointed or they can be elected as well. And different legislation varies by tribe. And I put the example of dry reservation. So for example, my tribe in Montana is dry. There's no alcohol allowed. But then if you go to different tribes, obviously that's not the case. And there is no universal citizenship criteria. So for what makes me a member of my tribe, it could be something completely different for someone else's tribe. They're not two different. And so a nation within a nation, and what that means is all of the different tribes and tribal nations are obviously within the bigger nation of the United States. And I put a couple of statistics here. The Native American reservation and trust lands equal 56 million acres. And the Alaska Native corporations and villages are equal to 4 million acres. And the sizes and tribes of reservations vary drastically by one. I put two examples here. Navajo Nation, it's about 400,000 members with 16 million acres of their reservation. The Augustine Band is 20 members with only 540. A little bit about the tribal nations in Nevada. There are 21 federally recognized tribes and across 28 reservations, bands, and community councils. It's equal to 1.6 million acres. And 97% of the tribal nations are rural, while there are 1,000 urban native.
Thank you for the overview. This is why we're here today, is to debunk the myths that everybody is taught in the United States, unfortunately, about Columbus. So the biggest myth, right, is that Columbus discovered America. In fact, he did not discover anything. And as an Indigenous person perspective, we kind of think of it as invasion. He invaded an area. So yeah, school children all across the United States all learn about Christopher Columbus. Who is he? Besides being awful, he was an Italian seaman and explorer. So he's from Italy. And he was a slave trader for 12 years under the Portuguese flag. But as Spain became a greater and greater power in Europe, he wanted to work for the greater power, which was Spain. He wanted originally gold, but then he later just was an expert at acquiring slaves all across the world. In colonial times, so the early 1600s, people kind of regarded him as a hero. And by 1906, Colorado, weirdly enough, was the first state to honor him with their own day, Columbus Day. And then it wasn't until 1937 that it gained its federal status as Columbus Day. So it hasn't even been 100 years that we've had Columbus Day. So it's not too late to change it, right? And so there was also a pro-Columbus movement and scholarship really kind of making him into a bigger deal in the 30s and 40s, but thankfully the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, we've kind of gone to more truth-seeking, more indigenous perspectives on scholarship and what the real truth was about Columbus. So a good turn into honesty. So this is the most important date for Indigenous people. We kind of view it as our big timeline, pre-1492 and post-1492. In 1492, I know you all probably know the jingle, Christopher Columbus set sail the ocean blue with the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria, his 3 ships. And this is kind of his journey. So he reached what is now the islands off of Florida in October of 1492. He was trying to find obviously the trade route to what is modern day China or modern day India. The Orient in the Indies is what they called it. But he hit these areas known as Hispaniola back then, but is now Cuba, Haiti, Dominican Republic. And he explored those areas quite a bit before returning to Spain in 1493. 4 journeys across, 4 journeys to that area every single time. So his journey is, this is his journey that he took. So he landed outside the Canary Islands to kind of regroup himself, and he took this very long journey with his 3 ships to modern day Hispaniola, the islands off of Florida. So just to really like point out, he didn't discover, as we'll talk about, Indigenous people. If anything, they discovered him on the shores. One of his boats crashed before going back to Spain. And on his second journey, the Spanish Empire afforded him more ships, 17 fleets, and more conquistadors, more soldiers and people to come with him. And so this is his 4 journeys right here. Nowhere does he get to what is the current day United States. Interesting. So Columbus captured and enslaved Indigenous peoples. This is as truthful as it can get. On his first voyage, he took 10 to 25 Indigenous people back to Spain, of which only 7 or 8 survived the voyage. On the second mission, he was going to acquire not only gold, but also Spain finally gave him the blessing to acquire more Indigenous slaves. So he brought back around 500 captives, of which 200 died on the way back across to Europe. Columbus is thought to have enslaved about 5,000 Indigenous people during his 4 journeys. And he would take young girls as young as 8 years old and provide them to his men, his soldiers, the conquistadors that came with, and he put them into sex slave rings, basically. And this is just a depiction, this picture of Christopher Columbus going before the Spanish court, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, into the New World. He wrote his journals, which is a great source for historians to kind of look at what happened during these time periods. These journals still live on today, but he wrote these things about Native people, which is just wild. So the first one he wrote is kind of explaining the viewpoint of Indigenous people. They brought us parrots and balls of cotton and spears and many other things, which they exchanged for the glass beads and hawk bells. They willingly traded everything they owned. They were well built with good bodies and handsome features. They do not bear arms and do not know them. For I showed them a sword. They took it by the edge and cut themselves out of ignorance. They have no iron. Their spears are made of cane, and they would make fine servants. With 50 men, we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want. So his intentions were very clear, and it obviously showed the Indigenous people being friendly, welcoming, trusting people, not ready to be engaged in war or any other conflict. Later, he would write, of course, too, as soon as I arrived in the Indies, which kind of just shows that he was lost. He didn't even know where he ended up. And then after several months in the Caribbean, in 1483, before he took back off, 2 Native people were murdered during trading. And he wrote again in his log that they were once gentle people, but they are now evil. And I believe they are from the island of Carib, and that they eat men. So he perpetrated this narrative that Indigenous people were cannibals. So savage cannibals with dog-like noses that drink the blood of their victims. So he really just kind of pushed this lie out. So Columbus instigated the genocide of Indigenous Americans. Columbus is the OG colonizer, guys. Not a good dude. He created this encomienda system, these large estates that were ran off of forced labor. And what he would do is if the Indigenous people did not meet their quota for getting gold in the area, he would cut their hands off and they would bleed to death. And if they didn't get their hands cut off or bleed to death, people would attempt to flee, right? Because they knew what was going to happen, the ramifications if they didn't get gold. So they were hunted down by dogs and they were killed. So of course, this was an island area. There was not much gold to begin with anyways. So the people knew that, and the island turned into a massive killing field by the Spanish. And so the Arawaks, the indigenous people of this island area, they eventually took to mass suicide and infanticide, meaning they would rather kill themselves and their children to escape the cruelty of the Spaniards. Very deep. And so Howard Zinn is a notable historian. He writes from a very indigenous perspective and did lots of research, of course. And, the Spanish were really good at keeping logs of all the bad things that they did. But he wrote in 2 years through murder, mutilation, or suicide, half of the indigenous people, the 250,000 natives on the island of what is now Haiti, were dead. So by the year 1515, there were perhaps 50,000 native people left, and by 1550, there were 500 left. And a report of the year 1650 shows that none of the original Arawaks or their descendants were left on the island. He literally brought enslavement, disease, removal, relocation, war, genocide to indigenous people. Not a good dude. So in terms of how does this relate to law? Because this is very important, especially if you take my federal Indian law class in the spring, which I hope you do. We talk about the doctrine of discovery, which is a big legal principle that has the philosophy that Europeans, if they are the discoverer of lands, then they get superior title to the land. So if you discover the land, it is yours. But of course, indigenous people were already here. They didn't discover anything. But because native people didn't believe in God from the Roman Catholic perspective, then therefore you wouldn't be able to have that land because they didn't believe in the same type of God, right? So the doctrine of discovery has its roots in the Roman Catholic Church. It's been used all across the world to acquire land from indigenous peoples through the use of papal bulls. Basically, you have this big white edict where the bull or the Pope says, "Hear ye, hear ye, in the name of God, you get these lands." And so that's really what happens here in the United States. Columbus used it as well in the island areas, took the land in the name of God and for the kingdom of Spain or whoever else. So the doctrine of discovery is used as the bedrock principle for the pillar case of federal Indian law, which Johnson v. McIntosh. Okay. This is a good clip by The Sopranos. I want you to watch it because I think it's a good Italian viewpoint. Okay, so I really like to show this because it's a different perspective. But also we have a resident Italian professor from the College of Hospitality, Marta Soligo, and I would like her to come up and right after this and kind of give us like an overview. So is it anti-Italian? No, it's anti-slaves, anti-everything else. So Columbus Day is one of the biggest holidays in the United States. And for Italians, especially, no doubt it kind of pains them to recognize that their countrymen who they believed discovered or explored America was the cause of mass deaths and genocides and pain, and it's still felt today. So how do you reconcile this? There's lots of options, but more education on the topic. This is why we're here today, we're talking about it. Celebrate a better, well-deserving Italian. You guys, how great would be a Michael Bublé day, right? That Christmas album hits, right? Or there's like a lot of other Italians that we can celebrate that aren't awful, like Michelangelo or Leonardo da Vinci, whatever. Invite Italians, Indigenous people to sit down and kind of heal and work this out, because we're not trying to be anti-Italian. We're just trying to celebrate something else that's positive, healing. We need to get rid of Columbus Day. It needs to die in order for Native people can really heal fully from this. Go ahead. So the truth, he didn't discover anything. He didn't even come close to what is now the United States. America was not even America yet. He hit some islands. The indigenous people, if anything, they discovered him because he was lost off the shore. And remember, he was trying to go to India and China. He didn't make it there. Columbus tortured everybody, from other conquistadors to the indigenous people. In fact, he actually got arrested in 1500 by another Spanish like governor or head person and brought to the court because he was so cruel to even his own men. And since the 1990s, there's been growing awareness in the United States about this dark past. And people are slowly changing it to Indigenous Peoples Day. Berkeley, California was the first city to officially change it to that. And then preceding that, South Dakota in the 1990s changed it to Native American Day, which is fantastic. And so many Latin American countries have also renamed it to reflect the anti-colonial sentiments. And I kind of want to just leave it from there. You take over.
Thank you. So thank you for coming, everybody. Gracias, Malitax. My name is Yvette. I'm of Quiche descent, which is an indigenous people in Guatemala. So this segues really well into like how Latinidad in Latin America ties into Columbus era discussions. Before I start, I do want to let everybody know in my culture, it's tradition that we offer like something to thank you for being here and sharing a space with us. And we give a lot of reverence to our elders because of oppression. We don't have many elders, so we fear them as wise and beloved. And we also give a lot of reverence to our ancestors because of all the things that they have been through and how they care for us. So in Quiche tradition, we have what's called worry dolls, and these little dolls represent elders or ancestors, especially if you're from a people who has been displaced from their land. And what you do is you just, they're like your little homies. You tell them your worries, you put them under your pillow, and they take care of it for you when you feel like no one else can. So I brought some for everybody. Please feel free to grab some after the presentation. My tia made them, and she will be very happy to know that her little friends made it too. So what does Columbus Day really represent? Like not just in the United States, but there's repercussions of colonialism on indigenous peoples all over Latin America. The Euro-Spanish invasion and subjugation of 1524 really was Columbus precluded these events, and Columbus opened the door for other violent invasions to take hold, specifically the brutal attack on the Quiche Maya under Hernan Cortés, and the extreme force and deceit and subjugation that was used to subdue indigenous people is counter to what our culture is. So it really took advantage of a people who had no malice in their heart, and that marks the centuries of Spanish rule in Latin America. And colonial racial hierarchies exist all over Latin America. For those of you who are Latino or have Latinidad in your communities, there's this thing where that's known in our cultures where families talk about the abuelito con ojos azules, the grandpa with blue eyes, that's somewhere in the lineage who bettered the race. And this is something very embedded into the Latino culture. Quechua people in Guatemala make up a large percentage of the population, but they are the most racially discriminated against, from the dialect we use when we speak Spanish to language discrimination, all the things. And that persists, and it's really important to recognize so that we make sure that we're the ones to stop it. That when we hear these things in our family, the anti-Indigenous sentiments, that we recognize that that's not okay. The United Front, Indigenous Resistance and Global Solidarity, I think we see this now more than ever. Indigenous movements, especially the land back movement that's all over North America, has really inspired the movements that have been ongoing in Central America and South America and all over Latin America as well. So there's an enduring presence. As the Native Americans here in these parts of the Americas, we have always been here. This is just some of the indigenous people. Yes, please, snaps all around. This is some of the indigenous communities that are in Latin America. Quechua is where my family is from. I'm also a descendant of the Quechua people in Ecuador and South America. But we're all over, and unfortunately, we suffer the same histories and current day problems. So Columbus era impacts on Maya community specifically. This is really special for me to be able to come into a shared space with other indigenous people and share what my people have gone through, because it is in my my family's recent memory what's gone on, and being someone who's displaced from their own lands, it's so amazing to be welcomed by other indigenous communities. And I think that really that's what indigeneity represents. So just a little bit of history. The Quechua Maya went through they call it a civil war. I don't like to call it a civil war. But we dealt with encomienda and enslavement, religious and cultural erasures. So having pieces of culture like my worry dolls, that's an act of resistance. So when I share that with you, I'm sharing the resilience of people as well. Thank you. There are ongoing colonial land theft, and most of Guatemala's lands is in the hands of wealthy elites, and that leaves indigenous communities displaced from their ancestral lands. And this imbalance is directly attributed to this Columbus era time and the actions that have taken place. And it exists today through ongoing imperialism. And none of this is something to celebrate. It's not to take away what has happened as far as progress has gone in these different parts of the world, but taking things on the backs of others is nothing to be proud of. So the war and genocide that happened in Guatemala is known as the silent Holocaust because it's not well-known history, but it went on from 1960 to 1996. And this is actually what displaced my father to come here to these Americas, because the way these regimes were taking over the indigenous communities would subjugate the women to like sexual enslavement or enslavement in general and persecution, but men would be recruited into violence. So my father, being two boys out of a family of 7, left ancestral lands, and currently I have only 2 aunts that are still there and cousins, and my grandparents are buried on our ancestral land. But the silent Holocaust, what it was is the United States supported through funding a civil war, which led to the genocide of over 100,000 known Mayas, but the number could be significantly higher because of people who have just disappeared. So similar to what's happened in the United States, but in this modern context. And despite, I know a lot of this is hard to hear. It's hard for me to say, my voice gets shaky because it is so close to home, and you will see the faces specifically here who I can tell survived this persecution. Like, it feels super amazing that we're still here. So I want all of this not to go, not to just focus on the bad that's happened, but to really focus on the resilience and the power in this room of our presence and of creating a solidarity between other communities who have gone through similar things. So cultural resilience and political resistance. In Latin America, specifically the Quechua people in Guatemala, and I know that there's people in Chile who have the same situation. We make a majority of the population, but we don't have sovereignty. So sovereignty here in the United States is not something that's available to different indigenous communities. But we look to the North American Native Americans for inspiration on how to create that. In Guatemala, the indigenous people have started movements to get involved in the political structure, but getting involved in systems that aren't meant for you is difficult and it takes a long time, and we deal with that even here today. But leaders like Delma Cabrera and Rigoberta Menchutum are champions of like modern history. They're women who I think everybody should know about, and what they've been able to do for the Quechua and other Maya descent people in Guatemala has been amazing. Now, toppling Columbus, reclaiming history in Latin America. Just like in the United States, there is this weird balance of people who just like ride for Columbus, they love this dude, and people who are like, death to him forever. I'm really proud of the picture in the corner because that's in Guatemala, and it's not Columbus, it's not ahead of Columbus, but it's another colonial conquistador that came. But as awareness rises, as we learn, as things like this happen, indigenous communities really do lead the change of how we see Columbus and how we see colonialism and its negative effects as a whole. For everywhere from Colombia, Chile, Bolivia, Ecuador, Guatemala, they've all done big movements on Columbus Day, Indigenous Peoples Day, specifically to topple down these colonial statues. And that meets fierce resistance with governments. So I think there's a lot to say about the protection and preservation of colonial structures in our government and how important it is for us, the descendants of the liberated, to really stand up for what's right and kind of say that this is not okay, not on our watch. And really confront those uncomfortable conversations with people who do like ride for Columbus and say like, oh, it's better in the race, and look at where we are now, and question like, well, what do you mean by that? Like, where are we now, and what has that done to our descendants? And now I want to talk about a land back movement, because I really do think land back is a global path to unity and restoration. It's not the sense of like ethno-nationalism, which is weird and a colonial ideal. Like, we're not trying to say we want this all for us, go away. It's really about valuing the stewards of the land who's always been here, who had sacrificed like blood, sweat, and millions of energy protecting the land. And I think restoring relationships, reclaiming stolen land or getting rights to land, and what's happening here in North America really has like this ripple effect, and it's inspiring, specifically in Central America, but all over Latin America as well. Land back is taking hold, and I don't want to understate at all the reverence that indigenous communities in Latin America have for Native communities here in North America, because it is so important that we recognize our brothers and sisters and siblings in the fight, and build solidarity so we can create movements where we're not only helping our people get recognized or get their land back or whatever it may be, but we're really helping shift power dynamics in the direction of indigenous people as like retainment for everything we've been through. And then learning and building political power. Like, now you all have the responsibility to take whatever hit closest to home for you and share it with somebody else. So invite people to things like this. I see people from my section that came, and I'm grateful for everyone who's here who's not of Indigenous descent, but everyone in general. Thanks for coming in and writing for the people.
I want to bring up Soligo, who's from Italy, because we had a good conversation last week, and I find it interesting, to have a perspective from Italy, talk about Columbus a little.
Okay, so hi everyone. I'm so honored to be here. And first of all, there was nothing anti-Italian from what I'm seeing, so I don't know why they say that. So I was born and raised in Italy. I moved here to the US in 2015 to attend my PhD in sociology here at UNLV. And I discovered there is Columbus Day. And I didn't really understand. Again, something that we were talking about in Italy, we don't have Columbus Day. We don't. And I was like, why do they have Columbus Day? I didn't know anything about it. Then I started working with the College of Hospitality, and I hear Tammy saying that she was talking about Indigenous People days, and she was talking about how they were having issues with the Italian community. And when I heard Italian, I was hoping I misunderstood. Like, what's going on? So I started studying, and I discovered that the Italian American community is obstacling that, and I don't think it's right at all. First of all, there is nothing anti-Italian against this. It's not a personal attack to the Italians, and I don't know how can they say it. I think it's extremely, Italians had a hard life when they came here because, you know, we all know they went through oppression and whatever, but this is the worst thing they can do, I think. Like I think that the best way they will have to honor their ancestors, like their great grandfather who came here and went through a very horrible experience, was to be close to other communities, for example. And I'm really trying now that I know, now that I'm aware, I'm like talking with other Italians in Italy, and I'm telling you know what's going on, and they find it hard too to understand what's going on, right? And I'm trying to understand also what's the thought behind the Italian American community reasoning. And I think that one of the best way again to, and this is a little bit personal, but I just became a citizen. Like thank you. Like last year, and I know how this vote will be important, right? So I think that the best way we can honor the immigrants and Italian immigrants who had a hard life is why not make the right choice and side by the people who now are going through similar challenges. So that will be not, we don't need a day, right? And if we really need a day, I like the Gianni Versace. People, right? I'm a history of art lover. I love Michelangelo, Leonardo, right? All these people who, and I really, we don't need a day. We don't need, if we need a day, why don't we call it Italian Heritage Day, right? And having it another day that is not today. So honestly, and I'm a sociologist of tourism. So all I study is tourism and culture. And, you know, it's really like, it breaks my heart to see the Italian name associated with this. So now that I know, now I see, I cannot unsee, right? So I know it's nothing. I'll do my best to spread the voice and to, so I mean, you know, I'm Marta Soligo, I'm in the College of Hospitality. So you find me online if you want to send me an email, whatever you want, I will be super happy. I mean, I know a bunch of Italians who just moved here from Italy and they don't understand it either. We don't have Columbus is a guy we study. And another thing, and now I'm sorry. Another thing that I wanted to say, history is something we cannot erase. And I don't know how these people can say that that's not true. What scholars, history scholars are saying. Again, I'm an assistant professor. I just started my tenure track and I need to publish articles, and it's so hard to publish an article, right? Because it has to go through peer review by other super scholar, right? So the fact that an article is published about this means that it's not a lie, that is true, right? That all the things they are discovering now about Columbus are right, are scientifically proven, right? And historically proven. So I don't know who can say that that's a lie. Right, because like just the fact, and I went on the database, the scientific database, and I found information about it. So it means that there are foundation, and we really need to have, yeah. So I will start with my first vote.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Happy Indigenous People Day.
Well, we have like a little bit of time. I found this video and I think it's really good. He's a good friend of mine, Vincent Schilling from Indian Country Day Media Network. And it's just a little bit about more historical truths and facts while we eat. But I really just want to thank NALSA and the hosts for coming together on this very important day to really spread the word on the truth. So any final words?
Thank you guys all for
Thank
being
you.
here. I appreciate it.
Let Shane know.
Please don't forget to take a worry call if you, but you make it happy if you did.
Thank you.